Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, the Viceroy of Verisimilitude, the master of fun and wonder, the existential Mr. Rogers, Mr. Robert Meyer Burnett, and this is Robservations, the show about something. This is Robservations number 245, and it is, of course, brought to you by Lucky Tiger Men's Grooming Products for those men who want to look good and feel great. And you know, if you want to look good and feel great, you can go to their website at getluckytiger.com and buy any of their products and punch in PGS for what? Say it with me now. Post-Geek Singularity, and you get 20% off your order. And you people, you imagination connoisseurs, you gentle beings are all part of the Post-Geek Singularity. And you know, I want to talk about specifically you today. I want to talk about fandom, Star Wars, the Force, and Freddie Prinze Jr. People are wondering, Freddie Prinze Jr., why do you want to talk about him? Well, let's talk about Freddie Prinze Jr. and how he exemplifies winning. He has been with Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Sarah Michelle Gellar, for the better part of 20 years. So for that alone, he deserves our respect and our admiration. But as many of you may or may not know, if you follow these things, Freddie Prinze Jr. has also been the voice of Kanan Jarrus on the Rebels TV show for 4 years, for the 4 years of the show. Now, he was on Jeff Dye's Friendship podcast. And you can see this. They published a clip from this. I think it was recorded a while ago, but they did publish what is being called his epic Star Wars rant. And just to give you a little background, this is from CBR.com. It's been reported everywhere. Hell, the Mary Sue even came out and wrote an article. I would never read from the Mary Sue, however, but I am mentioning them. Star Wars, Freddie Prinze Jr. drops epic rant on fans' franchise mythology. And this is by B. Calisioga, I think. B. Calisioga wrote this article. And goes on. Star Wars Rebel alum Freddie Prinze Jr., who voiced Kanan Jarrus, revealed that even he gets hatred from Star Wars fans that don't like where the franchise is going. In a preview for Jeff Dye's Friendship podcast, he explained that Star Wars is made for kids and that angry fans are unhappy about the franchise not aging up with them. He went on a rant to explain how the Force works in Star Wars, specifying that this was wisdom passed down to him from Dave Filoni, who learned it from George Lucas himself. People bitch about the dumbest things. These are archetype characters. These are George Lucas's words. There is no Jack Bauer in Star Wars. That character doesn't exist. It's not Han Solo. Han Solo's a reluctant hero. That's the archetype, he explained. Darth Maul, who everyone wants to win and is everyone's favorite because he looks sick and he's great in the video games. Fuck you guys. He's Sisyphus. He is born to fail. Learn your Greek mythology like, I don't know, George fucking Lucas did. He's cursed to roll a boulder up the hill only to have it roll down to the bottom every single time for eternity. That is Darth Maul's quest. He's in on the joke, you guys. He knows it. He's just cursed to live like that. Luke Skywalker is Cinderella or Sleeping Beauty, he said. He can talk to things that don't speak English, and he understands what they're fucking saying. He gets a fairy godmother instead of a fairy god. He gets a fairy godfather instead of a fairy godmother who teaches him how to be the best Jedi in the world in no time effing flat. According to what George Lucas passed on, Palpatine was acutely aware of how the Force worked, and that killing the only person that could be his true rival, Anakin, would be a mistake, because the Force would correct that. So instead, he seduced Anakin to double the strength of the dark side. The Force still had to balance two Sith, so it gave the galaxy light side twins, Luke and Leia. These are George Lucas's words, Prince added. This is information, not affirmation. Prince ended his rant by adding that there is no such thing as a gray Jedi, a concept that might surprise some fans, as gray is a concept heavily associated with Qui-Gon Jinn and linked to the opening Will's poem at the beginning of The Force Awakens novelization. Not canon. I know it's supposed to be, right? Who knows? There's no such thing as a gray Jedi. Qui-Gon even says, I turn towards the light because it's there, Prince insisted. There's no gray. That's pretend fan fiction shit, which is cool, but don't try to canonize it because it doesn't work, and I'm never going to buy it ever. Star Wars is for kids. So, of course, within the Star Wars fan community, and let's face it, all of us Post-Geek Singularity members, all of you imagination connoisseurs, who isn't? Who isn't a Star Wars fan? So presumably, where's the first place one would look to see what the reaction to Freddie Prinze Jr.'s rant is? Well, you look to Reddit. Of course, I did. Freddie Prinze Jr., Kanan Jarrus's epic rant about Star Wars fans and the balance of the Force, a general discussion. This comes from Flavius Arteves, I guess, Flavius Arteves. He posted it one day ago. And this is what his response is, or her response, but I think Flavius would be a dude. Telling other fans your interpretation of Star Wars is wrong because it's not based on my understanding of working directly with George Lucas is just as much gatekeeping as the hardcore fans they complain about. The extended universe had many different interpretations of the Force and continuing to show callous disregard for fans with differing opinions because they grew up with the franchise at the time or don't agree with the direction Disney has taken the franchise only furthers the divides and perpetuates the toxicity. I do agree he makes valid points about Lucas and his view, and I do think Grey Jedi was a stupid thing to bring into officially licensed content, but I don't think that absolute dichotomy to the point where it completely eliminates character agency, as he describes, is a valid interpretation of the Force or Star Wars. I don't agree that the characters have to fit the overly simplistic archetypes he assigns to them, although I love the connection of new canon Maul to Sisyphus, or that they should have complex character arcs, or that the franchise shouldn't have complex story arcs. Why? Because I grew up with different media and a different interpretation, and it's a subjective point of view when discussing officially licensed content of a fictional universe. Obviously, racism and sexism shouldn't be tolerated. That pretty much goes without saying. Okay. What I find funny about all of this is, first of all, Star Wars at its core should be fun. It's supposed to be fun. You're supposed to have a good time with it. I remember when I saw Star Wars in the theater at the UA 150 on 6th and Blanchard in downtown Seattle for the very first time on the Sunday after it opened. It was the most mind-blowing thing ever. And it began, well, what was at least a 5.5 year journey, almost 6-year journey from the opening of Star Wars to the opening of Return of the Jedi in 1993. So for 6 years, for the most part, Star Wars was fun. Everybody loved Star Wars. Nobody would why would you have a bad word to say about Star Wars unless you were a curmudgeon like Harlan Ellison? There were some science fiction writers, or of course, Carl Sagan. Even Carl Sagan, you can look him up on YouTube. He gets bummed out because Chewbacca doesn't get a medal. I'm sure Chewbacca got a medal later. We've talked about this for over 40 years. But here's the thing. Star Wars, Star Trek, the MCU, Harry Potter, James Bond, Frozen, the Toy Story movies, Jurassic Park, Jumanji. You know what all of these things are supposed to be? Fun. You're supposed to have a good time with them. They're supposed to put a smile on your face and warm your black hearts. And you're supposed to enjoy them. And when you open up a package of blueprints, and when you open up an EU novel or a comic book or a model kit or an action figure, it's supposed to fill you with joy. That's what it's supposed to do. So we, as fans, all of us who live in the Post-Geek Singularity community, especially on social media, and I'm guilty of this, people. I'm guilty of it. Especially when it comes to Star Trek Discovery. I am guilty of being a destroyer of joy, of being somebody who quashes the fun. I've been that person. And ultimately, even when I'm coming out, just so you all know, when I'm ranting about Star Trek Discovery, there is a point in me. I'm still smiling on the inside because even though I'm talking about Star Trek Discovery, I'm still talking about Star Trek. And I understand everybody wants to be good. All of these people that that are disappointed in Force Awakens. I was one of them, and Last Jedi. I get it. We all want Star Wars to be good. We all want it to be what we want it to be. But if you were to ask everybody what Star Wars was to them, you'd probably get, if you asked 100 people, you get 100 different answers. And Star Wars was something that was, in fact, created in the 70s. It was born out of George Lucas's mentality, who grew up with serials like Flash Gordon, who I'll bet 90%, well, actually, I'll go even further. I'll say 98% of the people ranting and raving about Star Wars online have never even watched a Flash Gordon serial from the 40s. They haven't even seen it. They've never read Edgar Rice Burroughs. They might have seen John Carter, which, by the way, is getting a lot of love lately on the internet, which I like. And yet everybody's going to tell George Lucas, hey, I bet they haven't even seen Hidden Fortress or Seven Samurai or Understanding. I mean, if you haven't seen Hidden Fortress or The Dam Busters or movies that George Lucas was directly lifting from, and let's face it, most Star Wars fans have not. I'm not saying if you have, I get it. Some people have. I understand. People are going to be like, Rob, I saw those things. Okay. But at the end of the day, fandom, modern fandom on the internet has a screw loose. We're all a little nuts. We're going a little crazy because we seem to be forgetting that ultimately these are things that are supposed to make us have a good time, put a smile on our faces. It's like eating mental cotton candy at Disneyland, or having one of those big turkey legs at California Adventure. It's supposed to be a good time, and if it's not a good time, then why do you let it bother you? And I love this idea of gatekeeping. I've been accused of being a gatekeeper. You know what's funny though? I've never gone anywhere, and I've never walked into anyone's house and locked the door to their bedrooms and told them that I'm not going to open the door to their bedroom unless they take all of the objectionable Star Trek novels and Star Wars novels and action figures and everything out of their room because they don't like it the way I like it. This idea of gatekeeping. We all have opinions, and opinions are fun to bandy about. That's what makes life interesting. I love hearing people's alternative points of view. I don't think talking Star Wars or Star Trek to anyone has ever got my blood very high to the point where I didn't like them anymore, or I wanted to punch their lights out, something like that. And Freddie Prinze Jr., this rant is an expletive-ridden rant. It's a good rant. And now people are coming after him. You know what? When Freddie Prinze Jr. is no longer on that podcast, well, he's not on there anymore. He gets to go home to Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I think Freddie Prinze Jr. is a pretty happy guy. So when he hears that somebody doesn't like Star Wars or is telling him about how the Force is or what's going on, people are even questioning, like, when did he ever work with George Lucas? I mean, I'm sure when they're recording Rebels, I guess they would probably record the VO at Skywalker Sound. Maybe George Lucas took them all to dinner. I've been to Skywalker Ranch. I was there when we were working on Lord of the Rings. I was there doing a piece on interviewing the guys who did all the sound design at Skywalker Ranch for a few days. I did not meet George Lucas when I was there. Never met George Lucas, but I met other people. There was a lot of people working there. But anyway, it cracks me up. It cracks me up, and I read all this stuff, and I'm bemused because here I am talking about fandom. Well, I'll tell you something that happened to me personally yesterday on Twitter. Somebody came out, a woman. I don't know her, but I actually found out I had previously blocked her on Twitter. But Erin Cummings, the actress who's now shooting a show, I don't know if I can say what show it is, so I won't, but is currently back east shooting a new show. She was defending me. This woman said that on the John Campea show, my comments about a potential A-Force movie, and the A-Force, for those of you who don't know, there's one shot in the final conflict of Endgame where all of the Marvel female characters are together in one shot. Valkyrie, Captain America, everybody that's still Captain Marvel, everybody that's still alive, all the women. and we were talking about the idea of an A-Force film, an all-female Marvel character film based in the MCU. And I don't remember exactly what I said, but this woman said what I said was not, I guess it wasn't woke enough in some way. Maybe it was more lascivious. And I got to thinking, I'm like, I will freely admit that watching hot girls in spandex or whatever the hell they're wearing is very exciting to me. Dare I say, arousing. When Kate Blanchett walks out as Hela and her headdress, the Jack Kirby-esque headdress comes on, and she's wearing that tight green and black number, got my blood up. I found it very alluring. And you know why? Because I am biologically programmed to respond to what I would consider to be beautiful women. I always have, my whole life. I've loved beautiful women since I guess I was 5. And if I'm going to say that the idea of watching a group of women, super heroines, team up in a movie, and I find that if I jokingly say that I'll watch that, where can you go wrong? Well, that doesn't mean that I don't want great, well-developed characters and a great story, because after all, that is my axiom: good characters and a great story. Yet, this idea, I'm going to be flat out honest. There is no way, shape, or form that I will ever not have some kind of a response when I see a beautiful woman. I don't care if I'm at a dinner party and I see a striking woman in a beautiful dress. I don't care. I used to talk about how when I was in Australia and New Zealand, women wear different kinds of perfume than they tend to wear in America. And it was delightful walking down the streets of Sydney or Auckland because you could smell this delightful perfume. The air was filled with it. And you could just walk around, and not just because of, like, especially in New Zealand, the lush foliage, but, being able to smell that in the air is a good thing. And it's not something I'm ever going to apologize for. Now, does that mean that I'm going to reduce all women to stereotypes that are there to serve me? No. I mean, I would not want to watch a film full of female superheroines that were stupid and all they did was prance around in their costumes. That does nobody any good. And who cares about movies like that? I want to see movies with good characters and a great story. And let me tell you something else. I feel the same way about dudes in movies. I like watching hot dudes in movies. I do. I like watching dudes that look good. When Brad Pitt takes off his shirt, I like that. I think that shot in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood when he's on the roof and there's his mid-50s physique, I'm like, man, I want to look like that guy. It's a turn on. I have no problem saying that. When you watch movies, you want to see beautiful people. In the world around us, I like seeing beautiful people, both men and women. And by the way, if a guy walks by me and he's wearing a fantastic cologne, the first thing I think of is, wow, what kind of cologne is that guy wearing? If he's wearing a tailored suit, I'm like, when I see Daniel Craig come out of the water in Casino Royale, come on, man. I think male or female, you're going to respond to that. He looks great, and he's wearing Tom Ford clothes. My cologne of choice, for those who want to know, is Tom Ford Black Orchid. I'm wearing it right now. I've been wearing it for years. I think it's great. I think beautiful people are great, both male and female. And even better when they're on the big screen. Does that mean that that's all I care about? No. Bringing it back to Star Wars, one of the great things about Star Wars is to discuss the Force. What does the Force mean? All we get from Yoda is the Force. It surrounds us. It's an energy field that surrounds us and binds us. It holds the universe together. And there's a lot to be said that George Lucas didn't just make that up. I mean, there is a lot of science to suggest, Gaia theory, that our planet Earth is all part of the same continuum. Human beings seem to believe that we exist outside of that continuum, but we don't. As much as we might think that we do, we don't. Of course, scripture says that we were given sort of domination over the earth, the animals, or whatever. It's not really going to work out for us in the end, because we don't. We think of ourselves as outside of nature when we're just as much a part of nature as anything else on this planet. It's all part of the same biosphere. And we can't get away from it. But everyone's interpretation of the Force is different. And I've always found that the most interesting thing. And of course, when the original series, the original trilogy of Star Wars movies came out, the Force exists. At least the way I interpreted it is that the Force is everywhere, and if you chose to do so, anybody could tap into the Force if you know what you're doing. There is and we saw Obi-Wan Kenobi beginning to train Luke in the ways of the Force when they're on the Millennium Falcon, going to hopefully get to the rebel base and bring R2's cargo of the Death Star plans. And we get into that as if there's a lot of Buddhism in there, mystical energy, Asian religion, a lot of things that are mixed in the code of Bushido, a lot of things that are mixed into the idea of the Force. But the idea originally in the first Star Wars is, I don't think it was supposed to be, you had to be Force sensitive. All that stuff sort of came up later. I mean, when Yoda was training Luke on Dagobah, it was, I assumed that many people, if Yoda trained them, could tap into it. Now, people would be better than others, certainly. Just like people can be better than everyone else according to their gifts. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be Force sensitive. Oh, Gilbert is here. He has a new trick where if I'm sitting at my desk, he pushes up with his snout. So I know he's there, and he probably wants a cookie. So I'm going to give him a cookie. Gilbert has the Force within him. Don't you, Gilbert? You do. I think you do. You have the Force. Well, here you go, Tallulah. You can have one. And you can have one. I've been giving them cookies today. That's all they get. They only get one right now because they've had cookies. 4's top. Gilbert, you got one. That's it. That's all you get, buddy. All you get. Sorry, buddy. See, Gilbert is now, he knows. He's smarter. He learns. But anyway, I got a letter. About the Force. Oh, man. From Adam Blue. And Gilbert is now taking paper towels. He loves, just let him take it. Adam Blue writes, Hey, Rob, you made an interesting point the other day about Star Wars in relation to how it reflects on modern society, or more specifically, how it doesn't. And so it's more interesting to talk about movies like Joker. I agree that I love movies that have deeper meaning and messages about society, giving viewers something to contemplate. Could it change their lives? There are times I've watched movies and continue to think about them, even when having to make life choices. Some movies that come to mind include one of your favorites, Apocalypse Now, and another off the top of my head being Quest for Fire. Wow, no one's ever written to me about Quest for Fire. And while I haven't seen The Joker yet, by the way, Quest for Fire, decidedly not woke. And while I haven't seen The Joker yet, I love the idea that it speaks on mental health issues, but I've also heard it doesn't go deep enough, and I need to see it to see how it personally affects me. Getting back to Star Wars, I've loved it most of my whole life. But as I grew older and got deeper into enlightened cinematic experiences, I never considered Star Wars to fall into that category. But now I'm in my mid-30s and I've had so many life experiences, created new habits to help shape my future. And at the end of the day, I realize this enlightenment I've been inching closer to is very much related to Star Wars. Going my whole life as an atheist and more science-leaning, I had closed myself off to other ways of thinking. Since dipping my toe in psychedelics and making meditation a regular habit of mine, I've experienced things that cannot be quantified or explained. Just like how I can't share the actual feeling I have when I experience something, I realized these experiences are part of a reality that exists, and there is no math that can explain it. Can math explain the experience you have when you dream about falling? I decided to take this idea with me through the rest of my life. I don't need to be labeled as an atheist. Not only am I then anchoring myself to the visible reality, but then I'm closing myself off from potential experiences. Life exists because of a balance. Our planet is never fully in extreme high temperature or extreme low temperature. It defies entropy, allowing complex chemical reactions to take place. But life also has these extremes. I can be really young, then really old. I can choose to give and choose to take. And what is the experience like for me to choose from these options? In Star Wars, the Sith choose to take and the Jedi choose to give, or so they think. In the end, we exist because of balance, and Star Wars is about finding that balance. In the prequels, we're presented with Jedi that meditate, that talk about balance, and this is good for any human in general. I mentioned before that I meditate, but I didn't used to. In fact, it seemed silly to me. But I can't give you the math on my experience to prove its power. You have to find it in yourself, just as the Jedi teach. In The Empire Strikes Back, Luke wants to save his friends, despite Yoda telling him not to. Luke is experiencing a feeling that Yoda cannot. Not that Yoda can't experience love for friends, but Luke's personal love and care for his friends is something that cannot be quantified. Because of this immeasurable experience, Luke saves his friends and confronts his father unknowingly, propelling his and his friends' lives further. Yoda was too caught up in the labels and the science of the Council's version of the Force. We all saw how this created Vader. In Episode 1, George Lucas introduced midi-chlorians. Looking back, this is an excellent way to continue telling the story of Star Wars. George Lucas uses the Force as an allegory for human experience, and when we get to the prequels, George attempted to science it up a bit, which I think should be necessary for modern science to do about consciousness. But modern science tends to dismiss consciousness as just an emerging phenomena of neurons crossing one another. If that's the case, how can a meditative experience tell me things about my life and how to move forward? If that could be quantified, couldn't that help people all over the world? And we've heard that George Lucas did plan on diving into the microbiotic world for the sequel trilogy, which personally confirms to me that Star Wars is about the human experience and what we can do to change things for the better, despite what may be asked of us. That is why we have to look inward to find the answers. Because of this realization, Star Wars does have deeper meaning to me. The current Disney sequel trilogy still discusses balance and internal struggle, but doesn't go the step further that George Lucas planned on doing. Everything still seems to be about the Force, when the Force is really just a medium in which living beings can use to make decisions and experiences that manifest in their lives. Thanks for reading, Adam Blue. I love this letter, and I think it also applies, first of all, to a large extent to fandom. The way we perceive things is really based on how much we know. The more highly educated you are, the more you know about the world around you. The more books you've read, the more you understand about the human experience throughout history and how that experience might apply to you today. The more you're a crazy Irish doodle, the more you can bark at ear-splitting volumes. I don't presume to know what Tallulah's experience of the world is, but I know that if I did know what the experience of the world was for her, I could probably stop her from barking while I'm live on the show. But in a way, that mystery is what keeps her attractive to me. Isn't that what keeps most women attracted to men? She is, after all, a woman, and I don't presume to understand her, even though she's a dog. But I think that there is a lot about the world that we don't understand. Like I've talked about before, we only see in certain spectrums of light. There's light all around us we can't see, but because we only exist in a certain way on a certain we can't even exist. We can't exist at the bottom of the sea on this planet. We can't exist on top of Mount Everest for very long. We don't even inhabit this planet in a holistic way. We only inhabit a little bit of this planet, not all of it. I mean, think about it. The sea, we can't even go 20 feet under the sea for more than a few minutes without dying. And yet, most of this planet is covered by ocean. So in terms of perception, and bringing it back to the fan community, we all have different perceptions of everything. And while I've talked about equality, human equality, it should never be based. Martin Luther King didn't want equality to be based on skin color. He wanted it to be based on integrity and the kind of person that you are. And what's really important, it's not about skin color or gender or sexuality. It's all about the experience of those things, not the label of those things. And if you've grown up a certain way, you're going to have a perspective on the world that I don't have. And what I want is to live in a world where I can hear about all those perspectives. When those people who have grown up different from me have something to teach me because their experience is different than mine. And if you look at it that way, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. And if we limit our ability, or we limit those people's ability to get their stories out, that's a bad thing. I think that's sort of anti the force, you know? And what we need to do is we need to respect other people's differing opinions, even if they're talking about Star Wars, you know, or the Force. No one is gatekeeping. No one is keeping you. If you want to love Star Trek Discovery, go ahead and love Star Trek Discovery. You should embrace it, because you know what? You are getting something out of it that I am not getting, nor will I ever get it. So I think more power to you. You know, go on. And that kind of diversity of thought, of intellect, is kind of the force that surrounds us and binds all of us. It's our collective experience of life and the world. And we should remember that every single person's experience is different. You know, I was having a conversation with my very good friend Dave Hargrove yesterday about Joker, and he and I were having a disagreement about certain aspects of the film. It was a pretty vehement disagreement. I've known the guy for over 30 years. I met him at USC in my first week of school, and he's my oldest friend in LA. And we constantly are having these kinds of discussions about things, but we can argue like cats and dogs. But I don't dislike Dave. As a matter of fact, I love going to the movies with Dave, because sometimes we'll go see a movie like Midsommar, and we'll have food, and on the way out, it's like we got to go get a drink, and we'll sit down and talk for 3 hours about what happened in this movie. Dave and I can sit on the phone for 3 hours, as Elizabeth can attest, and can tell you that we can talk about a film for 3 hours, and we can be at opposite ends of the spectrum, but it's a delightful conversation. And I love learning from other people. And the thing about fandom is, when somebody disagrees with me about fandom, that's how I learn. I'm like, because then I'm forced to question my own beliefs, and I have to come up with arguments, cogent arguments, to explain why do I love this and why do I not love that. Anyway, Willow Yang asks, have you watched El Camino yet? Do you plan on going to the theater for your first viewing of the movie? You know what? I do want to go to the theater for my first viewing of the movie, but you know what? I'll tell you something. I was thinking about that, and I think I would prefer to watch it on Netflix, and I'll tell you why. I was thinking about this because there's a recap before it starts. I did watch their recap. Breaking Bad is something that exists on TV for me. And I want to see how El Camino works within that same milieu. Now, I know it's a widescreen image, but that's beginning to be par for the course for TV. So I think I'm not going to watch The Irishman streaming. I'm going to the theater to see The Irishman. But I think it's okay to watch El Camino on my TV at home, because I want the experience to sort of equate to the experience of Breaking Bad. I'm probably going to end up watching the last 2 hours of Breaking Bad before I watched El Camino, to get myself back in the headspace. We shall see. Royce Freeman says, I know you have said you don't like Highlander, but they did a revised version years ago where they moved the fact that they were aliens and improved several things. Have you seen that version? The Renegade cut. You're talking about Highlander 2. I loved Highlander. You know, I loved Highlander. Highlander 2 was a disaster. I want to say I've seen 3 versions of Highlander 2. I think they're all pretty goofy. You know, I admire Gilbert he wants to steal my earbuds. Bud, hey buddy, you can't just jump on my desk. There's too much stuff here you can't have. He wants my glasses. He wants my earbuds. He'll take them anywhere. Gilbert can be sometimes a menace, but I love him. He just wants to play. Don't you, buddy? Yes, he's looking for stuff on my desk. You know what he did? You know what Gilbert did? Gilbert took my quarter scale Hot Toys Boba Fett gun, his blaster, and chewed it up. That's what Gilbert did. You know, any other dog would have been euthanized, but Gilbert, I forgave him. But anyway, I've seen like 3 different versions of Highlander, I think, Highlander 2, and I think they're all sort of ill-conceived. And I get it. You know, the one thing about Highlander 2 and also Exorcist 2, they're just so bonkers and strange. And Gilbert, you keep trying to take things off my desk. That I admire the impulse to do something different, even though it didn't really work out very well. But I can't blame anybody for trying. But yes, I think I own it. The Renegade cut. Royce Freeman also says, have you seen the movie The Wizard of Speed and Time? It is about an FX wizard. I'll tell you something about The Wizard of Speed and Time. The Wizard of Speed and Time was made by a guy named Mike Jitlove. And when I first got a VCR back in 1980, I had a friend of mine named Steve Pitcher, and he had Mike Jitlove was making a lot of stop motion animation movies. And The Wizard of Speed and Time was one of them. He also made a Disney film that was, I forget what Disney special it was on. He's an amazing filmmaker. I've actually met Mike Jitlove. I've met him at USC, and I've met him at a couple of events. And I love his stuff. Wizard of Speed and Time, it's a little too kind of goofy, but his effects work was amazing. And what he was able to do with stop motion was a huge influence. I used to watch his movies and try and recreate what he did with my Super 8 Minolta XL601 camera when I was a kid. You know, I was making Star Wars movies with my action figures, and yeah, so I love Mike Jitlove. He was a big influence on me when I first started shooting film. Anthony Gonzalez says, what are your top 3 Kevin Smith films? Reboot soon. Well, first of all, my first favorite Kevin Smith movie is the first one I saw, which was his first movie, Clerks. I thought Clerks really, Clerks came out there. For those of you who don't know, Steven Soderbergh with Sex, Lies, and Videotape at Sundance really broke open the independent film movement, along with like Spike Lee. She's Gotta Have It. And there was a lot of excitement in the independent film world, a lot of interesting voices emerging, and Kevin Smith was part of that. I mean, in the early part of the 90s, and Clerks was a movie that showed really anybody could, and this is I'm not denigrating Kevin Smith, anybody could make a film about their experience. You didn't necessarily have to have all the best equipment. And I really admired Clerks. I liked it a great deal. I thought it was a great little movie. So I think Clerks is my favorite, followed by Chasing Amy, and probably followed by Dogma. I think those are my favorite Kevin Smith movies, just off the top of my head. But I'm looking forward to see Jay and Silent Bob reboot. I think that it looks pretty great. Willow Yang says, over or under 50% Jesse runs to Alaska. Yeah, and teams up with our favorite serial killer. I don't know, maybe he will. It's hard to say. Gilbert is really being needy. I don't think Gilbert has ever been this needy when I've been on the show. Gilbert, why are you so needy today? What is it that you want? You know what he wants? Okay, I know what he wants. I'm going to give him what he wants. What he really wants is not a cookie. He wants something he's not supposed to have. I'm going to give him one of these. He loves these pretzels with peanut butter in them. He loves them. So do I. I'm going to join him. How about that? You never see me eat on this show. I'm going to join the dogs. Look, and he always wants another. He doesn't get another. You get one, bro. You get one. Anyway, I got more letters. I got good letters today. I'm going to read another one. This comes from Dean Mikitich. I think I got his name right. I think I'm saying Dean Mikitich's name right now. Hi, Rob and the Post-Geek Singularity. The other day, you talked about the current crop of writers for Star Trek wanting to write their own stories. I have no issues with this, but I do have issues with the quality of the stories. Gilbert. Okay. I don't know what Gilbert just took off my desk. I think it's just paper. But look at that. Anyway, I have no issues with this, but I do have issues with the quality of the stories. With what we've seen, they belong more on a daytime soap opera than in Star Trek or any other sci-fi show. Is this the writer's fault? Partly, looking at the IMDb pages for these writers, I have seen none of them have written for a science fiction show. They all come from drama shows like Revenge, which are more in line with daytime soap opera. That does not mean they are fellow geeks and nerds, and this is their chance to work in the genre they love. I place the blame solely at the showrunner's feet. They should have hired more than one writer that has some experience working in this genre. It is also the showrunner that assigns the stories to the writers, and they sign off on what comes back to go ahead in front of the cameras, or for the writer to head back and work on it some more to get another writer, or get another writer to work on it. The showrunner does not need to be a fan of Star Trek, but they do need to understand it inside and out. They should have seen every episode of Star Trek and not just the original series, which is the impression I get from Kurtzman on the interviews he's given. They should also have your knowledge of Trek, and if they can't remember everything in such detail, there's the Star Trek Encyclopedia to help. Lord knows, even with my knowledge of Trek, I had to look things up, and there are many great reference books that can help. With this knowledge, they can write their own stories with the guidance of the showrunner, while at the same time staying true to the spirit of Trek. I also place the blame on CBS. You have said on more than one occasion that it is not show friends, but show business. So how can they let Discovery have 21 producers take a piece of the pie? I have never seen so many for a television show. CBS should have stamped that out well before it got to be a joke. It's just not good business sense to have so many. I guess in Discovery and Kurtzman, in the case of them, it is show friends. Dean Mikitich. Well, Dean, okay. You've provided another example for me to bash Star Trek Discovery, but I won't. I will refrain. But I think what you're addressing, the larger problem, is the same problem that all of these franchises have. And the problem is, why is it that the people that are now creating our venerable franchises that have been around for, in some cases, decades, why don't the people that are now creating the franchises, why don't they know as much as about the franchises as we do their target audience? And I think that is a very fair assessment. That is a very that is a question I think needs to be answered. I've said many times, why did J.J. Abrams take on the task of directing Star Trek 09 when he always said he was never a Star Trek fan? Now, Nicholas Meyer also was never a Star Trek fan when he did Star Trek 2, but he learned, and he clearly understood the concept behind Star Trek. Of course, he knew that a lot of Star Trek, Gene Roddenberry took a lot of Star Trek from Horatio Hornblower's adventures, and he was also a writer, an accomplished, both a novelist and a screenwriter and a filmmaker in his own right. And I think that that's all part of it. It comes down to a certain level of intelligence. And Gilbert, nobody. No. Gilbert, have you ever seen Gilbert so crazy during a show before? I don't know why he's so crazy. It's kind of funny, though. It's kind of funny. I don't know why he's being so crazy. But yeah, I think that's the problem, is that we know, we the audience, we know, and we're way more invested in the shows and in these mythologies than the actual people making them. Because the actual people making them, remember, just like an actor, if you want to find the person who knows the least about your favorite show, talk to the actors. And this is not a slight on actors. Great actors are incredibly important to make anything come to life. But those actors, they made the show. They'll never be able to watch a show or a movie that they're involved in and have the same experience that you have watching it, because they made the movie. They can only ever see the film. Whenever they watch a film, they're going to be thinking about what happened on that day and what happened on this day. There is no way they can ever watch the film and have the same understanding of it as we, the audience, that are seeing it only from the finished perspective. And I think the real problem is, and the hard part is, how do you find people that are huge fans that are also great filmmakers? And it doesn't happen very often. I keep going back to Creed. I keep going back to Ryan Coogler, who watched the Rocky movies with his father when his mother, I believe, had cancer, and became a huge fan of the Rocky franchise and was able to convince Sylvester Stallone about his idea. He had an idea about how to bring the Rocky franchise back, inject it literally with some new blood, and still respect what had come before. And he made arguably one of the great canonical Rocky sequels in Creed. I mean, it was an amazing thing. That's a perfect example of a filmmaker who loves a franchise that is able to work on their favorite franchise. And it's very difficult to find that in Hollywood. As a matter of fact, If you tell somebody you're a fan of a franchise, like a real fan of a franchise, they don't want you to work on their stuff. It's a very weird dichotomy. It really is. Anybody, will tell you that Ron Moore, when he got to work on Star Trek The Next Generation, he's like, I don't want anyone to know I'm a fan. He had to hide it. But yeah, so it's a different experience when you are working on something, and it's very difficult to find uber fans that are also gifted enough filmmakers that they're going to be hired to work on these franchises when there's so much money involved. I mean, unfortunately, risk-averse Hollywood can't just hire any Tom, Dick, or Harry, any Jablonski to come on in and go, hey, man, why don't you make this movie? You can't. You have to have your bases covered. You have to have somebody that has a track record, and not a track record on necessarily making Star Trek. You have to have somebody that has a track record in making television in general. See, that's the whole thing. People think, okay, you've made TV shows, so it doesn't matter what TV show you're working on. We know that you can deliver a show on time, on budget, even though Star Trek Discovery has never been on time or on budget ever. Gilbert, you're going crazy. You got it. Dude, why are you getting on my desk? Why, buddy? Why are you getting on my desk all the time? Give me a kiss, baby. Yeah, that's right. Everyone's like going, "Ooh, Lucy Van Pelt. Ooh, get down." That actually was a little wet for me. Pro tip, if you're going to use your tongue, you play your finesse game. Dan V900 says, I was very disappointed by El Camino, and it felt unnecessary. There is a storytelling device that is relied on too much, and a character just made me not believe it. It felt like an extended episode. Well, that's one of the first reviews I've heard from anybody who's actually watched El Camino. That's sort of disappointing. I wanted it to be great. Gilbert, why are you barking, Gilbert? I don't understand why Gilbert is barking, but apparently he is. Anyway, got another letter. Koba's here. Koba says, greetings, Rob. Today I'm writing to make people aware of the great work fans can do to help the franchises they love. As I've stated before, I am a massive Doctor Who fan, and today, October 9th, 2019, I watched something amazing. Students at the University of Central Lancashire, remade a long-lost Doctor Who episode, Mission to the Unknown, an episode that is thought to be lost forever, and it was bloody amazing, I must say. They remade it in such a way that makes it look exactly like the original. Gilbert, why are you barking? Exactly like the original, shot in black and white, same cheesy effects that are a staple of early Doctor Who. This is a truly amazing thing, and I want to praise all of the students at the University of Central Lancashire, who were involved. Gilbert apparently is a big Doctor Who fan, and I wish any Doctor Who fan in the Post-Geek Singularity, you should watch and find this. What are you doing? What is going on here? I don't understand. You can find it and watch it. It's on the Doctor Who YouTube page. This makes me proud to be a fan and part of a community who loves something so much they wish to recreate anything lost and make it as close to the original as possible. Many thanks, your friend Koba. Well, I haven't seen this, but how cool is that? I mean, to me, what a great use of fan energy. I mean, as people know that I was involved with a fan film project that is ongoing. My involvement's not ongoing with it, but what a great use. I mean, for somebody to recreate a lost episode of Doctor Who, that's fantastic. I mean, I'll definitely want to watch that. My first experience with Doctor Who was Eric Wallace, who's now the showrunner on The Flash. Eric Wallace would show me, him and John Colbrenner, we would have these days where we'd get together and watch old episodes of Doctor Who. We had a thing that we called Boogity School, believe it or not. And what Boogity School was one of us would have to bring something that we defined as being boogity. And old Doctor Who episodes were boogity. Godzilla movies were boogity. It was very nebulous. We didn't actually define it directly, but for Boogity School, somebody would have to show something to everybody else and explain why it is we are watching this. Why do you love this? Why is it boogity? And why are we why are you sharing it with us? And that's how I started watching. I'd never watched really. I'd seen episodes here and there growing up, but I'd never like watched whole arcs and things like that. So it was pretty interesting having Boogity School. Josh Razakis is here. Josh says, hello, Rob, and my fellow members of the Post-Geek Singularity. After the last letter that I wrote in, I got read out loud. I thought it was time for me to start watching The Next Generation again. After finishing my season 1 rewatch, I started thinking, why all the hate for Wesley Crusher? I always found him to be who all of us Trekkers want to be, the youngster smart enough to contribute to the Enterprise and get into Starfleet. Yeah, it was asinine that he left Starfleet, and in the end, that's a whole other thing, but when he was there, people hated him for being a young, smart officer. I don't get it. Would love to know your thoughts, Captain Burnett. Well, here, let me tell you why people hated Wesley Crusher. The idea of Wesley Crusher is fine. Having a young guy like Wesley Crusher and a prodigy is fine. But especially in the first season of Next Generation, it was like Wesley always had to save the day. He was too smart. You know, if he was a young kid learning the ropes and being like Ralph Macchio in The Karate Kid and truly being a Padawan, I think it could have been very, very interesting. But as everyone knows, Wesley was sort of Gene Roddenberry's creation, and that's where it all came from. And I think that there was a lot of wish fulfillment in Gene Roddenberry in the character of Wesley Crusher, and he just became annoying because so many episodes fell back to him saving the ship. He just had way too much power than the Starfleet officers that were supposedly knowing what they were doing. And I felt that. I mean, I totally felt that was the case with Next Gen. I really did. Factual Opinion says the Next Generation season 5 needed more Laren. I love her. Michelle Forbes as Laren. You know what? She was only in 9 episodes of TNG. I loved Michelle Forbes. She was later Commander Kane, or I guess Admiral Kane, Commander Kane in Battlestar Galactica. I love her. She's amazing. I used to live across the street from her, and we chatted. I've told that story when I told her that she was going to come back for Razor. She said, "Oh no, I'm not coming back to Battlestar Galactica. You're mistaken. I died." I said, "Oh no, you are. You're coming back." And she came over to my house one day and said, "What's next with my career?" It was very funny. But yes, I'm a big fan of hers. She was in Escape from LA. Michelle Forbes has had a huge career within the genre, and she's great. I just saw her. She's on a brand new show. I mean, she just works all the time. Brian Cruz is here. Brian Cruz says, "Hey, Rob, hope you're doing great. I wanted to get your suggestions or advice about something. First of all, I'm a massive comic book movie fan. I've seen and owned just about every major comic book movie and played most of the video games based on comic books, but there is one major and important area I fell out of a long time ago: actually reading the comic books. I've not read a comic book in at least 15 years and probably longer, and I have little to no memory about what I read. I am kind of ashamed of that, and I decided it's well past time I get back into it. Since Batman has always been my favorite, I decided to start with him. I just purchased the following Batman comics: Year One, The Long Halloween, The Dark Knight Returns, The Killing Joke, Hush, and Arkham Asylum. Great minds think alike. I mean, I have the original hardcover of this, but come on, it's an absolute edition of Arkham Asylum. Who doesn't want that? I have been told by several people that these are generally considered to be the best Batman stories, so I figured this would be a good start. But I have a lot more on a list ready to purchase. I realized I was overwhelmed and needed to take a step back when I noticed my Amazon shopping cart was up to $700. You should see my Amazon shopping cart. Or my Sideshow shopping cart. So for now, I will just focus on the ones I already bought. I know I could read all of these on the DC Universe app, but you will agree with me that there is something special about physical media. I love reading comics with physical. It's hard. I find it difficult. There's something about the digital experience it's diminished for me. That's true of books too. I've always felt handling it as part of the experience. I wanted to get your advice regarding what are some great comic books for people who either haven't read comics in years or maybe never read at all. The must-read ones any fan should try. or any recently released comics that you've enjoyed. It does not have to be just Batman, but I have always enjoyed DC more than Marvel. So at least for now, I would like to stay in that area. Any suggestions would be very much appreciated. Well, there are these comic book stories that have become sort of iconic. I mean, since you like DC, I would say Kingdom Come. The Kingdom Come series that Alex Ross painted. You've got to read Kingdom Come, Crisis on Infinite Earths, Watchmen. It's interesting because I would go and recommend ongoing series to you, things that I loved growing up, like the first 20 issues of Justice League, J.M. DeMatteis and Keith Giffen, the comedic version of the Justice League. I love that. It's hysterically funny, and it still is hysterically funny. But if, let's see, whether Paper Girls, not a DC comic, but a comic book I like. The Wicked and the Divine is a comic that I've been reading. Amy Dallin turned me on to that. Gosh, there's just so much when I'm thinking about Batman. There's so many different Batman stories. But basically, look, I would say Alan Moore's Swamp Thing run, the Absolute Swamp Thing with the first of his run is coming out next month. But there's just so many. I would read The Invisibles, Grant Morrison's The Invisibles, a lot of Vertigo's, or The Filth, which are two bizarre comics, Transmetropolitan, a lot of the Vertigo stuff. Of course, Sandman, my favorite comic book of all time. I would go back and look at Howard Chaykin's the first 12 issues of American Flag, because it's been so influential, especially in pop culture. Those are kind of more of the classics. But you just have to start. It's weird. It's hard to tell people, other than the mainstays, to tell people what to read, because there are things you're just going to dig. Like if you enjoy time travel stories, or you want superhero stories, or something more realistic. Again, it's really, really hard to say. Look, even though it's on TV, I really like the Preacher comic. I liked Why the Last Man. These are, again, DC Vertigo books. The Mr. Miracle that came out a few years ago. I've been working my way slowly through Jack Kirby's Fourth World, the big Fourth World omnibus. I'm like halfway through. It's like 1,600 pages. There's the Teen Titans, the Wolfman Perez Teen Titans run that ends up having the Judas contract in it. Great stuff. I mean, I should probably do a show about comic books, which comic books to read. But just off the top of my head, those are things that if you're getting into that. But definitely. Yes, I know. These dogs, I don't know. They're squirrely today. I don't know what's up. Maybe because there are squirrels outside. Who knows? This next letter comes from Christopher Collins. Christopher Collins says, I was curious what you think about Star Trek Insurrection. It is considered one of the most underrated of the Star Trek films. For me personally, I think it is my favorite of the Next Generation films, but not my favorite Star Trek film. That goes to Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home, then Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan for me. But Star Trek Insurrection is the one where I thought Michael Piller made this seem the most like a TNG episode on a film budget. For me, it is like Star Trek IV with more time focusing on the ships of the TNG films. I like this film because it utilized all the characters, the lighthearted comedy, the ships. I enjoyed seeing at the time cool drones that predate today's photography and military drones. I love the space battles in this film. I love that we were finally getting a chance to explore the captain's yacht. Up to this point, no one had ever explored the ship before in previous series or films, even though it was clearly identified on the blueprints and TNG trading cards. I like seeing the space battles in Insurrection and exploring the functions of the ship. I liked seeing a starship do things that we had not seen a starship do before, such as ejecting the warp core and detonating it in a nebula, or Riker using the steering column. In Star Trek First Contact, we don't get much time to explore the Enterprise E for its abilities, even though we know it has a cloaking device because they mention it. The Enterprise E gets assimilated fairly quickly in the film, and we don't see it function like a normal starship in the first film the Enterprise E appears in. I also felt like the Insurrection story reminded me most of a Next Generation plot, with people jealous of their related people, talking about ethics and the prime directive of right and wrong. We saw things like being able to slow down time that looked like a cool concept, but not everything needed exposition from the people, like the actress who later played Dr. Octavius's wife, as seen in Spider-Man 2. I love her. Now, I've heard on the YouTube channel Tex Trek that Insurrection is the whitest Trek of the TNG films, that of the Baku. They're all white, and no other ethnic groups seem to be represented. Picard is like Moses marching its people out on a great exodus. I like the concept of people trying to be younger by stretching their skin. I like the idea of a holographic ship to transport a society. Insurrection reminded me of a compilation of TNG episodes such as Homeward, Journey's End, Who Watches the Watchers, First Contact, and The Survivors. I like the visual look of the nebula and planet. I love Jerry Goldsmith's score, despite sounding similar to Star Trek First Contact, and I love the sound of the sound effects in this film. How do you feel about it? And thanks for taking the time to read and respond to this letter. Well, if you like Star Trek, first of all, I'll flat out say I liked Star Trek Insurrection. I don't love Star Trek Insurrection. I mean, it one of the things that I've always disliked about Star Trek, I know you're going, oh, you dislike something about Star Trek? And it was just a function of how storytelling worked. Whenever the Enterprise rolled up to a planet in the original series, they would inevitably beam down to the one city that was the center of all power on that planet. Whatever happened, I mean, to me, I never understood that. Even as a kid, I'm like, you know what though? Like, I'd be like, you know, there's things all over the planet. There's the United Nations. There's the Hague. I mean, there's stuff all over the planet that you need to go to on Earth. So why is it that the Enterprise rolls up to a planet and they always seem to find the one place, the one seat of power? And of course, you could say, well, they knew where to go, that they obviously could find out where they needed to be. But here was my problem with Star Trek Insurrection. No, not that everybody was white. Maybe that's just case in point. That's how that planet happened to be. But that Baku village, and the Baku, not a very big village. You've got an entire planet. It doesn't look like the Baku even have any vehicles. I don't think they ever really go far from home. And even if they did, even if they went hundreds of miles, even if they went thousands of miles on foot, why couldn't the Sona just go to the other side of the planet and build themselves their own colony? Why did they need to disrupt, potentially ruin the entire effects of the radiation that kept everybody young? I mean, when I was watching, that does not have verisimilitude for me. I mean, the Baku would not even have known the Sona were there. They could have kept their ships in geosynchronous orbit on the opposite side of the planet, and no one would have been the wiser. It's like when I watch Insurrection, I'm like, okay, but getting past that, I thought there was a lot of interesting stuff on it. You know, the fact that the Federation was going to steal this and use this power. You know, there was a bad Federation officer, Anthony Zerbe, from the Omega Man, you know, and from the Matrix Revolution or Reloaded. But Anthony Zerbe was the villain in the Omega Man, and he's the bad Starfleet officer in Star Trek Insurrection. For those of you, it's October. You should all watch Charlton Heston and the Omega Man if you haven't seen it, because it's a hoot. But it's okay. One of the greatest books ever written about writing for Star Trek is Michael Piller's unreleased book, but you can find it online. I think you might even be able to buy it or download it from his Sandra Piller, his widow. But Michael Piller wrote a fascinating book. They really were going to go for more of an Apocalypse Now type of a feel. It was going to be much darker. And everybody had their say. Brent Spiner had his say. Patrick Stewart had a lot of say into the script, and it really changed over the course of its production. And I think, to its great detriment, I think the problem with Insurrection, and I'll tell you, I like Insurrection. I really do. I enjoy the performances. Like you said, I like all the visual effects. I'll tell you something else about Star Trek Insurrection that's crazy. Once you've seen this, you cannot unsee it. So at the end of the movie, when there's this device that's going to steal all of the energy that keeps the Sona young from around the planet, when they're fighting inside of it, it's all blue. It was blue screen. It was blue screen. They were supposed to comp in space, but they didn't. I don't know if it was a budgetary issue or a time issue, or they realized this is going to be a problem, so they never did. So when you're watching Insurrection, you were watching when Picard at the end is it's unfinished. Next time you watch it, you'll be like, what? They didn't comp space into no, they didn't. which is crazy. It's so nutty. But yeah, I want to thanks for you writing in. I mean, I think there's a lot of stuff to like about Insurrection. It's not that it's look, it is definitely middle of the road Star Trek. But there's a lot to enjoy, and I like that they went in a different direction. And the fact that it feels like an episode, and the idea that the Baku were being looked at with a duck blind and all the stuff that was going on. It was very, very interesting. I mean, I think that there's a lot of neat Star Trek stuff, but it is so middle of the road, and I think it's too much like an episode. And the fact, look, they built this beautiful village, but it looks like, it's basically David Koresh and his followers. It was just this one civilization that had basically an encampment. It was strange, but I did like it. I mean, I didn't hate it. I find it an enjoyable time at the movies. Definitely middle of the road. Not a great thing. Oh, Dan V900 says Justice League: The New Frontier by Darwin Cook is a must read as a DC fan. Marvels by Busiek and Ross, absolutely. I didn't say Marvels because he said he was a DC fan, is a must. Saga is great for people that don't read comics, along with Invincible as a superhero story. It's funny because I have hardcovers of all these. But yes, for those who haven't read Justice League: The New Frontier by Darwin Cook, it's fantastic. I can't recommend it enough. Marvels is, of course, the Kingdom Come equivalent. It's fantastic. I've recommended that on the show a lot. Saga is a great comic as well. That's newer, and it's still ongoing. I think Saga's it's not over yet. But those are all great recommendations, Dan. Good stuff. Let's see. Here's another one from Christopher Collins, back to back. I've noticed that Wrath of Khan versus the motion picture battle for favorite films. I think that Wrath of Khan may be more superior as far as how it utilizes sound effects versus the motion picture. The example I give is the dry dock sequence in both films. You look at the motion picture in that scene, and the bridge seems virtually quiet and relies heavily on score to move the scene. There's not much going on in that scene for the characters to do besides give orders. However, when you look at Wrath of Khan, the scene with the dry dock, there's all types of character moments. You hear Sulu giving his checkoff list. He's a checklist, not a checkoff list. We give Sulu permission to go where he wants to go. We give Savik a moment as well as McCoy. There's dialogue heard on the intercom giving the checklist. Plus, the Enterprise has a lot more ambient noises from both inside and outside the starship. It's strange to me because they're using the same footage but used completely differently. Even James Horner's score of the same footage is much more effective emotionally, making the Enterprise seem grander than the version seen in the motion picture. I don't know about that. My question is, why Wrath of Khan was able to get me more emotionally invested in a scene when they're both using the same footage and the characters are just leaving dry dock? What am I missing? Well, Christopher, this, sir, is a very astute question. And I give it up to you for this because Star Trek: The Motion Picture is basically a rough cut. It was literally not finished, and they never had time to properly mix or finish Star Trek: The Motion Picture. It was never properly finished. Now, if you watch the director's cut, they rectified a lot of those problems, especially with the sound mix. But and there is a director's cut of the film, which is, I think, far superior. And hopefully one day it'll get done on 4K disc. But that's what you're responding to. And what's really interesting, sound mixing really takes a movie to the next level. It's a whole other, I mean, a lot of people think, oh, well, Rob, we're done editing this movie, so it's done, right? No. The sound design of a motion picture, it's different. It's a whole different thing than editorial, but it is just as important as a well-edited film to make a film an experience that will permeate your consciousness and get into your head. One of the things that's really interesting, I talk about Tango Shalom right now. I've been talking about for a long time. We're in we're pre-mixing the movie. We're doing all the sound design for the film, and it's being done reel by reel. And our sound designer, because we're a low budget feature, we're what's called a bumpable job, meaning if another job comes in where my sound designer, where Steve Yeaman is getting paid more money, he takes that job and we're put on hold. So by the end of next week, we're hoping to have Tango Shalom reels starting on Monday. We're working 7 days straight, and we're hoping to have reels 1, 2, and 3 completely pre-mixed. Not final mix, but everything that we're going to have in the mix is there. all the different sound effects, all the different dialogue, all the different ADR and everything that we've built. It's all going to be there. And then by the end of hopefully mid-November, we're going to have reels 4, 5, and 6 mixed, pre-mixed. And then we go on to a mixing stage and do the final mix. So you're literally in a theater and you're mixing the movie together. That's when the movie really comes to life. I mean, like you talked about ambient noise. When you're making a movie, when you're recording, obviously, you're recording dialogue in a room, you actually have to record room ambience where you literally, everybody's quiet, they roll sound, because every room is not totally silent. Every room has a sound to it. And when you're talking in one room, your voice sounds different than it does in another room. So sound design is very, very, very important. And a lot of the time, especially with science fiction movies, you have to build a sound environment. All of it's built. It's all made up sounds. You have to get them, and they're multiple layers, and you have to build the surround channels into them. And it's a huge job, and it requires, everyone knows, I mean, I don't know, maybe people don't know now, but when the making of Star Wars was on TV in the late 70s, they showed famously Ben Burtt, who edited the prequel trilogy, but he was the sound designer for the original Star Wars, was going out and creating sounds. He was banging on things and recording them and slowing them down and speeding them up. I think the like the sound of the TIE fighters, that sound was, I think it is an elephant's roar speeded up or something. Science fiction films especially require unbelievable amounts of sound design. And what does the environment inside the Starship Enterprise sound like? We don't know. So they have to create a sound field that makes you believe. And unfortunately, Star Trek The Motion Picture was so rushed in its post-production because it was locked into a December 7th, 1979 release date that it was unfinished. So the movie that you see, that you get on Blu-ray, is an unfinished, it is a rough cut of the movie. It really is. And that's what we have. The director's cut that was only exists on standard DVD. It was not finished in high def. Is a much better version of the movie, and it's far more refined and finished than the normal version that you have on Blu-ray. So it would be interesting. I'd be curious if you would go back and watch the director's cut of Star Trek The Motion Picture, what you might think of it. But you're very astute. It was a very astute observation because it sounds very different. And like you said, it creates verisimilitude. It creates reality. Hearing all of those sounds, I mean, it can change things. Your experience of the reality of a movie is very, very, very much dependent on sound. So that's a good catch. And thanks for asking about that. I very much appreciate that. Good question. So yeah, that's a good thing to ask. Let's see what we got here. I've got a long letter to read. James Ito is here. Would you buy a UHF Weird Al as Rambo hot toy? I would not. I love the fact that you brought up UHF Weird Al. You know, here's the thing. I guess this would be a weird insight, a weird thing to admit. I take action figures seriously. Like, I have a few goofy things in my collection. Like, I don't like Funko Pops. Philosophically, Funko Pops, I can't deal with them. I'm totally about the realism of action figures. So what does this say about me? I don't know. So I have one Funko Pop action figure. Actually, I have two. I have Vina. I have a Vina from Star Trek Funko Pop figure. And I have Mads Mikkelsen's Hannibal Lecter. And I have my Hannibal Lecter sitting up on my bookshelf in the Imaginarium in front of my first edition of all of Thomas Harris's books, his Hannibal Lecter books. I don't like super deformed Gundams. I've got to have like the real thing, or as close to as possible to the real thing. And so I wouldn't buy, like, although you could have along those lines, you could then say, well, what if the Weird Al figure looked incredible? What if the realism was there and you had Weird Al being Rambo? That's still, it's a parody thing. It goes against my beliefs if that means anything. I know it's kind of weird. It's weird to say that, I guess, that, I don't know what that says about me, but I like things that's why I was never able to give up toys, because as I got older, as a child, I hated the fact that toys look so toy-like. It really bothered me as a kid. I'm like, why does this have to look so bad? There's a video on the Burnettwork that I made for the 100th episode of Heroes, Collider Heroes, where I talk about my hot toy action figure collection, and I take you through my old hot toys. I had a beautiful display case up in the Axner offices with a lot of my hot toys displayed. And I showed my display, and I talked about my favorite hot toys, but I gave a little preamble about how I got obsessed with action figures. And I complained, and I've complained on this show, how I hated when action figures and toys did not look like they were supposed to look. The colors were wrong. Like, why is the original Kenner TIE Fighter for the Star Wars figures not in the proper proportions? And why is it white? Why isn't it that cool TIE Fighter blue-gray? Like, I didn't get it. Even as a kid, I got this. I'm like, why am I supposed to like this? It does not look. How hard can it be to get the color right? Was it more expensive? Probably, to have colored plastic like that. It really bugged me. That's why I love my Hot Toys figures, and I love the big toys that we have now, and they're so realistic and so cool. I've got my Catherine Trammell quarter scale figure up there. She's not really a toy. I guess she could be used as one if you really wanted to go there, but I don't want to mess up her designer wear, her designer threads. And I don't, she's been perpetually smoking that cigarette ever since I took her out of the box. But yeah, I mean, the more realistic, the better. And so I couldn't bear to have a UHF Weird Al Yankovic dressed as Rambo, if that makes any sense. Maybe I'm just strange. I don't know. I mean, I do know I am strange, and it is weird. By the way, you know what I realized? I forgot to read a super chat yesterday, and I forgot it. And I just remembered that I forgot. And I would like to let's see. Let me find it. Hang on. I'm finding it because I want to have read it. Yeah. Chef DeMac said, he sent me a nice super chat. Chef DeMac said, "Hey Rob, I haven't sent in a super chat in a while. I just got back from Japan, and I thought I'd say, hey, you just got back from Japan and you didn't ask to pick me up some, Gundam like fixed figuration 1/100 scale stuff. I mean, look, if anybody has a hookup in Japan, I've got to get that new Gundam that's coming out from Char's Counterattack and the Tamashii Nations, the funnels. I'm going crazy. I've never been so like stressed out about getting a toy. It's sold out everywhere. I can't. If somebody's got a hookup, man, you got to hook me up. I'm getting very, very stressed about it. Although I've heard it was pushed from December into February of 2020. Maybe that's because they're going to make more of them, which would, let's face it, be delightful. So the last letter I have today, actually, this is not the last letter I have today, but I'm going to read this one. Good day, Robert. I enjoyed your review on the movie Joker. Due to your reference, this is from Garth. I'm sorry, I didn't say the name. This is from Garth. Good day, Robert. I enjoyed your review on the movie Joker. Due to your reference, I watched Taxi Driver and The King of Comedy prior to watching Joker. Yes, the movie did shamelessly follow the style of the two Martin Scorsese's films. However, I feel that this movie could have been easily a Martin Scorsese film if the studio did approve it the first time. Martin was clever enough to have no association with the movie, but placed Todd Phillips on the helm of the project for this Joker movie. The results, he can easily critique the comic genre as being too shallow, and they're just B grade, no matter how much money they make and how much money is invested in the genre. Yet again, Martin Scorsese is having a last laugh by showing us that a movie like Joker with a budget of $50 million plus can outperform just about any MCU movie in terms of character development and the message of the Joker movie. The movie really did make the viewer feel about the character. That's the highest level of what any true filmmaker or producer wants to make a movie that sends a strong message across the screen to viewers. A good movie needs to do that. If the movie did that, It does not matter whether the film is in black and white, whether it's VHS quality or 4K. It is the story that matters. On a personal note, please do not lament about you having what. On a personal note, please do not lament about having one foot in the grave. As far as I'm concerned, you are a golden treasure in the world of movies. Your insights are precious, and don't stop what you're doing. Keep it up. Best regards, imagination connoisseur, Garth. What a lovely letter, Garth. Thank you very much for writing that in. I don't disagree with you. As a matter of fact, speaking about Joker, there was a couple of things that I wanted to read about Joker, and now, unfortunately, I cannot find them. But I maybe I'll come back to those things on a different day. Who knows? Because why not? This is another letter from Stephen Goggin. Stephen Goggin says, just a note on your comment about mobile phones on the last excellent video you made. I also love watches, and I like the former American-made Hamilton brand who made the Ventura watch for Elvis Presley. Stanley Kubrick saw the watch and approached Hamilton to make props for 2001, which they did. And you can see modern mobile-like devices in 2001 when you can see the astronauts eating and looking at their mobile devices with big start and stop and play buttons. The actor Gary Lockwood was also in 2 Elvis Presley films, including the Elvis film It Happened at the World's Fair, which also starred Kurt Russell as a kid, where he kicks Elvis's chin. Of course, Kurt Russell also played Elvis. Elvis also used the theme to 2001 to open his live shows, and lots of original Star Trek extras were extras in Elvis's films as they shared the same studios. Elvis's Hamilton Ventura watch went on to inspire the first digital watch, the first called the Pulsar, which was worn by James Bond in Live and Let Die. The Men in Black also wear Hamilton Pacers and Ventura. Elvis's watch was designed by Richard Arbib, who designed the concept cars of the 1950s, and he also wrote a vampire novel called The Vampire Girl Next Door. I love finding out links between things. So when you mentioned Stanley and the mobile phone, I thought I would share these connections with you. Live long and prosper and continue these wonderful YouTube chats. P.S. I think you should get involved in making James Blish's novel Cities in Flight into a film. Even an animated film would do. That's from Stephen Goggin. Well, Stephen, you know what? I loved Cities in Flight. I read that when I was a kid. It was crazy. I mean, how cool would that be? I would love, look, my problem is my career right now as far as filmmaking goes. I have Tango Shalom coming out. Here's where I'm at in my career. I have Tango Shalom coming out. We're going to finish it up. We're going to try and get hopefully a streaming service to buy it, maybe play at some festivals. I've produced that. I edited that. I'm post-supervisor of that. So I've got that coming out. Lucas Kendall's short film Skyfighter that I edited and worked on. I have to do an upload of the film. The Dust Network, the multimedia network that you've seen, it's been on YouTube. Dust has a lot of science fiction shorts. They picked up Skyfighter for their network, so you'll be able to watch Skyfighter, the 15-minute short that Lucas just did a new draft of the script. We're trying to get a feature of that made. It's pretty good. I'm hoping that'll get made. Right now, I'm just going to be the editor on it, but I think if we ended up making it, I'm going to have to demand to be a producer because how much work would be involved. But we'll see. And that's pretty much it. What I really want to do is I also want to somehow acquire, either get the rights to Free Enterprise back or raise the money because I want to do the final cut, the final frontier cut of Free Enterprise. But the one thing about having Tango Shalom is it's always important to have something. You know, when you've got something, it's always the best for your career. We have a finished film. And I think for what it is, it's turned out, it's the best version of Tango Shalom there could possibly be. And for what was there and what was shot and how much money was spent, I'm very, very proud of Tango Shalom. So what you do is you parlay that. I will be actively seeking out financing. I mean, I really wanted to make, I was hoping to make Waystation, which of course, Matt Reeves, they announced they're doing that for Netflix. So there's a couple of projects that I would like to, that I've wanted to make for a long time. So, you know, we'll see if they pan out. But to make a Cities in Flight movie, man, I'd have to make another movie or two before anybody would let me come near to tackling that. Um, yeah. Now here's a really long letter. This is a really long letter that I want to read. I've had this for a couple days, but it's a long letter, and I like it. But it refers back. It comes from John de Benedict, and I really like this letter a lot. Hello, Rob. This is my first time writing to you. Although I've been following both you and John Campea for a while now, and I have a bit on my mind, so I figured I'd give this a while. In advance, I apologize for the potential length of my letter. I do tend to go on and on longer than perhaps I should, but here goes. In one of your previous chats, you talked about West Side Story and your enthusiasm for Steven Spielberg's upcoming adaptation. Like you, I love the Robert Wise film unabashedly, despite maybe a flaw or two I find with it, such as some of the actors' voices being dubbed by other singers. But I still think it holds up as a fantastic musical film at the turn of the tide for musical theater, and how the content on Broadway became edgier. The film is shot, lit, edited, scored, choreographed, and written, in my opinion, impeccably. And for me, Rita Moreno as Anita completely steals the entire film. Also, one of the sexiest women ever on screen is Rita Moreno as Anita in West Side Story. Some of the acting is slightly over the top for my liking, and like I said, the fact that they had to dub Natalie Wood and Richard Bamer's voices with actual singers because they couldn't carry the songs themselves sort of takes me out of their scenes somewhat. If you want an example of how verisimilitude can be broken in a film like this, for me, that is one example. West Side Story is a great reimagining of one of Shakespeare's most famous plays and translates mostly very well to the modern 1957 New York setting, distilled down to its essence. A blood-boiling rivalry between the Polish-American Jets and the Puerto Rican Sharks, and it has everything you could ever want in a musical. I just love it. So like you, when they announced that Steven Spielberg was doing his own film version of West Side Story, going back to the original stage musical for reference, I was very, very excited and intrigued by what Spielberg and Tony Kushner would do with it. And so far, with the casting developments, their decision to shoot the film in the streets of New York and New Jersey, I liked their decision to cast Ansel Elgort as Tony, since I loved him in both Fault in Our Stars and Baby Driver, showing his chops as a young, up-and-coming romantic lead man without missing a beat. Plus, he can sing and dance, so that's a major plus. I like the cast is mostly populated with singers, actors, and dancers, presumably from the stage, that I've never heard of before, particularly the Jets and the Sharks. I also love Corey Stoll as an actor, and I think he's perfect to play the police lieutenant Schrank, despite the image of Simon Oakland in the 1961 film etched in my brain. And I loved that they even managed to find a place for Rita Moreno herself, as if I couldn't get more enthusiastic. In general, all of the ingredients seem to be in place for this film to be something worthy of the success of both the original show and the film. And when the announcement of the film production wrapping came with Spielberg's heartfelt letter and cast photo he took, it marks what you and Campea have referred to as the tangibilization of Spielberg's upcoming adaptation. So like you, I can't wait to see this film. That being said, I do have a couple of concerns. First of all, Spielberg and Kushner made their intentions clear to go back to the original show as a starting point to adapt into their version rather than going back and just remaking the 1961 film, which I understand and do mostly agree with. My worry is perhaps the filmmakers will stick too close to the original stage production and that the film will feel less like a film and more like a filmed version of a stage production. Although with Spielberg, I doubt this will necessarily be the case, and I surmise that he intends to go more for the authenticity of 1950s New York City streets by literally going out with his cast and shooting it on the streets of New York and New Jersey. My concerns lie more with the actual content of the musical. In the 1961 version, you will recall two musical numbers, G Officer Krupke and Cool. Stay cool, boy. Gotta rock it. Okay, why these two numbers in particular? Well, because in the film, the placement of those two songs is different from where the songs were placed in the stage version. In the film, G Officer Krupke number happens in the first act when the Jets hanging around outside Doc's drugstore waiting for the Sharks to arrive so they can have their war meeting to set up their fateful rumble. And to be honest, the song itself is not my favorite. Yes, it's not my favorite either. It's goofy and harmless enough, but ultimately slightly grating on me, but that's beside the point. This song happens earlier in the film before the action goes down. And then we skip past the fateful rumble towards the end of the film after Riff's death, and the Jets are on edge, and we get the new leader of the Jets, Ice, leading the song Cool. This is the song I love. It's intense, edgier, jazzy, dissonant, and for lack of a better word, cool. It is cool. Now, as I said before, the placement of these two songs was a change from the 1961 film made from the stage show. In the stage show, the song Cool is sung by Riff and happens before the Rumble, where, of course, Riff and Bernardo are tragically killed. The Rumble is where Act 1 of the stage show ends, making Cool the song place in the first act. In Act 2, we find the Jets depressed after Riff's death, and two of the Jets, Arab and Baby John, are set upon by Officer Krupke and manage to escape him. They meet up with the other Jets, just like in the film, but instead of the Cool number, we get the G Officer Krupke number, which they sing in order to cheer themselves up. Now, ultimately, when the film was made, the placement of these two songs were changed or basically swapped to where they are in the film. Why is that? I don't know. Well, Stephen Sondheim, who wrote the lyrics to all the songs, expressed his dislike of the two songs' arrangement in the stage show, particularly G Officer Krupke's placement in the second act after Riff and Bernardo's deaths. From what I read from research I've done, Sondheim felt it was unfitting and maybe inappropriate to watch a street gang perform what is basically a goofy comedy number almost immediately after their leader is killed in a fight. I don't remember who he expressed this to, whether it was to Robert Wise or screenwriter Ernest Lehman, but ultimately the change was made. The goofy Officer Krupke number wound up much earlier in the film before the fight, and the Cool number was after the fight toward the end of the film. And for what it was all worth, I completely agreed with this change. Even actor Russ Tamblyn, who played Riff, felt it was a smart move to make this change. It just fits the tone much better to have the comedy number earlier in the film before the tragedy and then have the angsty Cool number afterwards when the Jets are getting ready to retaliate against the Sharks. So where on earth am I even going with this? Like I said before, the film that Spielberg is making is supposed to be going back to the original source material more closely than the 1961 film had, but even Spielberg's film has to make certain changes. For example, Rita Moreno's character in the remake, from what I've read, is a reworked, repurposed version of Doc from the show and the original film. How that will work in the remake, I can't speak to right now, but if in fact they have gone back to the Broadway show as the blueprint, does that mean that the two musical numbers are going to be placed where they have been in every stage version? Does that mean that the last part of Spielberg's film is going to have a goofy comedy number after the horrible shit goes down? Or are they going to make the same song swap as the Robert Wise film did? Admittedly, perhaps I'm making too much of this, as we as fans and imagination connoisseurs are often want to do, but it does raise my eyebrows a bit. I love Spielberg, except for Hook and Goonies, and I've loved the majority of his films from the time I was maybe 10 or 11 years old. As of now, I'm 28. But how exactly is his version of West Side Story going to have its own identity apart from the original stage production or even Robert Wise's classic film? Am I overthinking this a bit? Probably. But isn't that what we should be doing? Not overthinking, but mere speculating and wondering how certain things are going to work? Is it wrong for me to worry about Spielberg's film experiencing tonal whiplash in the second act because of a mere placement of a comedic song? Then again, every time West Side Story has been done again on stage in the years after 1957, including the 2009 Broadway revival, the replacement of Cool and Officer Krupke are exactly where they were originally. I would have thought that future stage versions might have taken a note from the Robert Wise film and made the same change in the future to help the tone flow more naturally. But no, from what I've noticed, the stage version, every time it's adapted, seems to be the same as it's always been, with all of its songs in the same place as in 1957. And forgive me, I do find a flaw with that. But that's just me. Maybe you and other fans of West Side Story feel much differently. I feel the story benefited greatly from the changes made in the 61 film, and I hope Spielberg's upcoming film will benefit from equally appropriate and tone-adept changes. But that song swap situation is just one example that I've probably spent far too much time on. How about the American number? In the original stage version, it was only the Shark Women and my Anita that sang the song. In the film, it was sung on the rooftop by both the Shark Women and the men. Anita represents a pro-America stance, while Bernardo represents the pro-Puerto Rico stance during the number, which was not the case in the original show. This was another change that I felt changed the nature of the American number and the story in a positive way. Even the lyrics, which were a bit more disparaging and derogatory for the time, were changed to fit film politics as they were in 1961, and the result worked. At the end of the day, my hope is that Steven Spielberg will find a way, as he has with many of his classic films, to give his version of West Side Story its own identity, and the identity that it may need during these troubled, divided times, especially in our country. Perhaps I have overlooked the fact that just because Spielberg, Tony Kushner, and crew have said they are adhering more closely to the story of the stage version, doesn't necessarily mean they aren't going to make the appropriate changes to make his film, well, a film. Because as much as I love what Robert Wise and Jerome Robbins did with West Side Story, there were times where I felt and still feel that his production was caught somewhere between trying to be a movie and still stuck being a stage production that was caught on camera. Even down to many scenes being shot on sound stages rather than on the actual streets of New York. Like I said, even many of the actors and dancers that played the Jets were performing their roles like they were doing it on a Broadway stage and less like they were in a film. In my view, there are many things that work on a stage that won't work nearly as well in a movie, and the same can go for adapting famous literature to the big screen. How much heavy lifting did Peter Jackson, Fran Walsh, and Philippa Boyens do with the script and rewrites after rewrites to shape The Lord of the Rings into something that could be more feasible as three big screen epic motion pictures? You know what they did? They got rid of Tom Bombadil. Thank God. Well, that was a lot. And yet we never hear the end of the ceaseless complaints that they never should have cut out everybody's favorite deleted character, Tom Bombadil. But that's another story. So those are my concerns. Is Spielberg's film going to be able to have its own identity apart from the stage show and the film that came before? I'm sure many might think so, but one never knows in this it ain't show friends, it's show business world. The Robert Wise film had its own identity and I love it, but I still feel it made only halfway to being a true film unto itself and not reminding people that this was first done on the stage. Perhaps the Spielberg film will be the same way, and it might even be deliberate for all I know. And as always, I have to resign myself to the fact that I can't express these concerns to him directly. The film is shot and will be put together over the next year for a next December release. Besides, in the famous words of one Doris Day song, Que sera, sera, whatever will be, will be. The future's not ours to see. Que sera, sera. What will be, will be. There you go. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. I hope you found my thoughts at the very least interesting. And again, I apologize for the length. I do want to say before I sign off that I appreciate the fan community of fans, geeks, and imagination connoisseurs you have created here with your website and your chats. I love that we, as fans of film, literature, video games, and so on, are comfortable to express anything we want, even if everybody that reads these letters do not see things the same way at all. So I wanted to say thank you, Rob. Thanks both to you and to John Campia for the growing community you continue to build with your passion and love for all things fiction and imagination, and I will continue to take part whenever I can. Yours sincerely, John DeBenedict. Well, John, let me just say, dude, that was a very long letter, but I loved it. You know, I've got two friends, Gary and Edmund Enton. They're twin brothers. They're filmmakers. They've directed, I think, 4 features. They even directed a Lifetime Christmas movie. They're the greatest. They're also musical fanatics. They know more about Broadway musicals than anybody. And they would have loved this letter. But to answer the questions that you've raised, I think that Spielberg's going to bring a lot of verisimilitude, and I think we're going to see it much more naturalistic. I agree with you. I think West Side Story is a weird hybrid of stage production and film, and you had really 2 co-directors. You had Jerome Robbins doing the choreography, and you had Robert Wise handling the film aspects of it all. So it is, I love it, but it is a weird hybrid of film and stage production, but it's still, I think, a phenomenal movie. I would imagine Spielberg's film is going to be much more naturalistic. I mean, I wonder, are people going to smoke cigarettes? Is it going to have gritty realism, or is it going to take place in sort of Broadway netherworld? I don't know. All I do know is that I think, I've waited for Spielberg to make a full-blown musical ever since I saw the beginning of Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. That anything goes number. I'm like, even though there's that one bizarre reverse when the dancers come back up because the camera is the film's running backwards. But I think this is a dream of Spielberg's to make a musical. I think he's going to pull out all the stops. I would not be astonished if this film gets nominated and wins Best Picture. How crazy would that be? That would be strange if you look at film history. But I think we're in for a treat. And I would imagine, I completely agree with you. I did not know that. I have never seen a stage production of West Side Story. Never. So I didn't realize that the Cool and the G Officer Krupke number were transposed, but it makes sense that the film would, I would imagine the film, because like you said, once somebody's dead, the G Officer Krupke, or two people are dead in the case of the movie, the G Officer Krupke number is it's a little strange to fall back on. So I don't know. I just want to thank you for this. Look, you don't have to be intensely geeky about Star Wars, Star Trek, Harry Potter, or the MCU. You can be just as geeky about Broadway shows and musicals, because why not? And I love that. I mean, musicals are such a vibrant part of film history, and we don't talk about them enough. And I love this letter. Thank you. And I really appreciate how long and how thoughtful this letter was. It took you a lot of time to write it. And thanks. It's an honor to get letters like yours and have them sent in. So thanks. I do very much appreciate that. So, ladies and gentlemen, unless we've got more chats that I have yet to get to, I think I might be bringing this chat to a close. Mellow Yosh is here. Mellow Yosh says, did you catch the short trek, The Trouble with Edward, and what were your thoughts? Well, I'm going to address this later at length, but I will tell you this, not much. Ooh, not much. You know, I would love it if our Discovery short treks would can they do anything where they don't rely on previously existing Star Trek canon to tell a story and not ruin the previously existing Star Trek canon? Why do they have to do that? I really disliked it, and I want to get I was thinking about if I was going to make that the chat for today, but yeah, I yeah, no. Oh, John DeBenedict just sent me a chat. He said, thanks for answering my letter, Rob. For the record, I am intensely geeky about Star Wars and the MCU. I just haven't expressed it yet. Maybe later. Well, John, I mean, look, no, you don't have to. I love getting long geeky letters about West Side Story, because that's not necessarily the what I'd be talking about right away. Because, you know, it's really interesting. I'll tell you, I'll be totally honest. When I talk about Star Wars or Star Trek, I get more views, you know, and admittedly, this channel is still small. This is a small YouTube channel. I mean, I recently passed 14,000 subscribers. By the way, if you like these chats, and any likes and any subscriptions helps these smaller channels out. But I have my audience, my YouTube analytics are really high. I have a lot of viewer retention and engagement. And you guys participate in the website at the Burnettwork.net, and it's great. And even though we have a small community that's growing, it's still a very active community, and that's what makes it so much fun. Look, I don't know how many people read letters they get from, but I love this. I love the kind of letters I get. And like, John, when you send me a big letter about West Side Story that clearly you've put a lot of time and effort into thinking about. And by the way, I learn from when somebody sends me a great letter. I learn from it. I think that's awesome, and that's what, you know. When I choose which letters to read, I think it's important that we don't just talk about Star Trek and Star Wars. You know, I knew that I wasn't going to get the kind of views that I would get on a Star Wars or Star Trek show about when I was talking about West Side Story. But I love West Side Story. I've seen West Side Story in 70 millimeter a number of times, and I love the film. I've always loved the film, and like I've told people before. When I was in the 6th and 7th grade, I was taking some jazz dancing classes, and I was the only guy in the class. And even I, as I'll do anything, but even I, you know, look, I took these jazz dancing courses voluntarily, but you could tell, like, the girls, and that was nice. It was cool that girls were in there, but I really liked the idea of dancing, like after Saturday Night Fever and Grease. But it was, you can't be one guy in a jazz dancing class full of girls. You know, it just doesn't work. They make fun of you. On one hand, it was pretty great, to be honest. But, you know, I was in the 6th and 7th grade, so it wasn't as great as it probably could be if I was in high school. But, you know, I've always been, I like musicals, you know, Singing in the Rain is one of my favorite movies. So it's great to talk about musicals. It's not, when you're talking about Star Wars and Star Trek and Harry Potter and the MCU and Fast and the Furious and James Bond, but that's why I'm working on a movie like Tango Shalom. People will be like, that's kind of out of your wheelhouse. No, it's not. No, it's not out of the wheelhouse at all. So I was extremely happy to read your letter, and it was a long, thoughtful letter too, and I quite enjoyed it. I quite enjoyed it. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that brings me to the end of Robservations, episode number 245. My God, I can't believe I'm closing in on 250 episodes. We're 25% of the way to 1,000 episodes. That is craziness. Craziness. I can't believe it. Brandon Valenzuela just sent in a chat, getting it under the wire. Brandon says, I called it 2 weeks ago. Michael Keaton is Batman again on Crisis on Infinite Earths. Okay, for those of you who don't know, a story broke. Michael Keaton's picture appears on a newspaper in the upcoming CW Crisis on Infinite Earths crossover, mentioning his marriage. Bruce Wayne's mentioned his marriage to Selena Kyle is mentioned. And, again, they must be having, everybody who works, and I've got friends that are working on both Arrow and The Flash, they must be having a ball. This Crisis on Infinite Earths crossover, I can't believe it's getting made. I mean, I can't believe how they've worked out everything, how they've gotten there. It's incredible. It's absolutely incredible. I think it's just the coolest thing that they're doing this. And Brandon says, it still counts in my book. No, absolutely. Listen, you can't just show a picture of Michael Keaton on a TV show, even if it's on a newspaper, a Warner Brothers CW show. Michael Keaton had to say, oh yeah, you can do that. So they took the time. They went and got Michael Keaton to say, hey man, can we put your picture in here? I mean, that's pretty cool that they had to have gotten likeness approval from him. And he said, yes. Man, this Crisis on Infinite Earths, it's bananas. It's just bonkers town. I love it. I think it's so great. And with that, Brandon, thanks for firing that in. I'm very excited about this Crisis on Infinite Earths crossover because, boy, I loved Crisis on Infinite Earths. I love the comic. I can't believe they're doing it over. I don't even know how many shows are involved. Like, I heard that even though Black Lightning is in it, there's not going to be an episode of Black Lightning that's a crossover. So is it just Supergirl, Arrow, Legends, and Batwoman? I'm not up on who is doing what and how they're doing it, but I just love that they're doing it. They're bringing the Monitor back. Ugh, can't wait. I'm so excited. And I guess that means the Anti-Monitor. I love the Crisis on Infinite Earths comic when it was first coming out. It was so great. Love reading it. But anyway, you guys, girls, gentle beings, aliens of all shapes, sizes, colors, creeds, people from different dimensions, whoever's watching this, I just want to thank you for being here. Thank you for your support. Of course, I always want to thank my moderators who make the experience being here that much better. So, Detective Jim, of course, the Sheriff of Nottingham, Terry over in the UK, Greg Smith, Mike Bodden, the Honorable Mike Bodden, will be probably back next week. He's been dealing with all kinds of issues, good issues, but he hasn't been around much, but he's still a moderator. So thanks to him too. The moderators, you got to give it up for the moderators, man, because they keep this place wholesome. Maybe not so wholesome if Vesna and Willow here, but hey, that makes it fun too, right? Anyway, everybody, thanks very much for being here. Thanks for supporting the channel. Go to the website, interact there, and as always, have a better day. And oh, by the way, if you're in Pasadena, Elizabeth is doing the Pasadena Art Walk tomorrow. She's got really amazing. She's got like canvas tote bags with canvas her artwork sewn on them. They're very cool. She's got t-shirts. So if you're in Pasadena tomorrow, come to the Pasadena Art Walk booth 15. I've got something I have to do in the morning, but I'll be back in probably around 1. So I might do a broadcast from there tomorrow. I'm going to try. I can use my phone as a hotspot. And we should be broadcasting from Elizabeth's booth at the Pasadena Art Walk. I don't know what street it's on, but we are in booth 15. So come by. It should be a fun day had by all. And if you want to get a great Christmas gift, an early Christmas gift for anybody, or there's a lovely lady in your life, come get one of Elizabeth's, buy a print of hers, get her t-shirts, or get her those tote bags are badass. I was like, wow, she's not only is it her artwork, but she's done all the sewing and put it on herself. I mean, it's pretty cool. So come by, check it out. Come get an early Christmas present. There you go. So tomorrow, booth 15, downtown Pasadena at the Pasadena Art Walk. And that is now the end of Robservations, episode number 245. And as always, have a better day.